Big Christmas is coming to Baltimore. I'll tell you all you need to know about Jhonkensy Noel coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Tuesday, January 6th, 2026, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we're going to talk about the Orioles' most recent waiver claim as they picked up the first baseman and outfielder Jhonkensy Noel off waivers from the Cleveland Guardians on Monday. We'll talk about why Noel was available as a former solid prospect and just being 24 years old, and also why the Orioles tried to claim him and what he could bring to the O's. And then we'll finish off with kind of a close look at the 40-man roster. It is full, once again, with Noel in there, but we expect the Orioles to make some more moves this offseason. Who would be the next players to get DFA'd off this 40-man? Because I think right now the decisions start to become just a little bit tougher. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by FanDuel. Before tip-off, check the FanDuel app and see what's dropping during NBA Happy Hour every Friday from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern. So let's talk Jhonkensy Noel. Didn't expect to do an episode here on Tuesday, and generally one waiver claim, at least at this point, maybe back in 2021, one waiver claim because the Orioles weren't bringing in a lot of players, probably brought us an entire episode. Now it's usually more of a segment, but this is an intriguing player that I want to talk more about, and B, it's the offseason. We can talk about a waiver claim here. That waiver claim is Jhonkensy Noel. We got the roster move on Monday. The Orioles claiming Noel off waivers from the Cleveland Guardians, DFAing right-handed pitcher George Soriano to make room for Noel on the 40-man roster. Let's start with who is Jhonkensy Noel. He's 24 years old, and he won't be 25 until July of this year. He's a right-handed hitting kind of corner outfielder / first baseman who's a big dude, 6'3", 250, an imposing presence when he gets in the batter's box. Initially signed as an international free agent out of the Dominican Republic by Cleveland in 2017, made it all the way up until December of 2025 when he was DFA'd by the Guardians off of their roster, and he is out of minor league options, which is one of the reasons why he was DFA'd. Now, Noel came up through the Guardian system, a guy with monster power and also a ton of swing and miss. It was also always a big-time boom or bust prospect. And he did get all the way to AAA at age 21. I mean, that's fairly impressive to get to that point at that age. He always had, 70 to 80 raw power, 50 to 60 game power on the 20 to 80 scale at FanGraphs, but the hit tool, the fielding were all pretty much gigantic questions from any scouting report that you read on Noel. Well, he gets to AAA in 2023. He hits 27 homers, but overall everything was pretty bad offensively. It was a tough year. He was well below average, but he was 21. He comes back to AAA in 2024. He's still 22 years old, and he breaks out. He hits 295. He's got a 140 WRC plus. Remember, 100 being league average. He was 40% better than a league average hitter in AAA. He slugged 578. He had a 21% strikeout rate, which was pretty low compared to what Noel was used to. And because of all that, and the Guardians being in a playoff race in 2024, but having almost no offense to speak of outside of Jose Ramirez, Noel made his debut, called up on June 26th of 2024. And wouldn't you know it, the Guardians were in Baltimore against the Orioles. And in Noel's first big league plate appearance, he hit a solo homer off Grayson Rodriguez into the bullpen at Oriole Park. And that started a red-hot streak to begin Noel's career. From June 26th through the end of August, he had 13 home runs for the Guardians in just 144 big league plate appearances, posting a 162 WRC plus in that stretch, making him the 13th best hitter in all of Major League Baseball in about that 2-month stretch among guys who had at least 140 plate appearances. Now, Noel was not able to keep it up. He had always been a free swinger. That continued in the big leagues. And once they got to September, pitchers started to adjust. He hit just 118 with a 0 WRC plus and a 33% strikeout rate in the month of September. But the Guardians were still able to get other production and win their division. And Noel was still put on the playoff roster because of how hot he was with the bat in July and August. And Noel got some serious run in the playoffs. Now, he didn't do a ton. He was 2 for 21 with 8 strikeouts in the postseason, but he had maybe the most, probably second most memorable swing of that postseason for the Guardians, coming up as a pinch hitter with 2 outs and 1 on in the bottom of the ninth inning in game 3 of the ALCS. The Guardians were losing the game 5-3 and already losing the series 2-0 against the Yankees, 1 out away from going down 3-0 and basically their season being over. And Noel hits a pinch hit 2-run, just massive home run off Luke Weaver to tie the game in the bottom of the ninth. The Guardians would go on to walk it off in extra innings to really get themselves back in that series. It was an amazing call from our old buddy Brian Anderson that made the call of that home run. It was just an awesome, awesome moment. Now, again, he didn't do much else in the postseason, but he provided an unforgettable Guardians postseason moment. Now, he wasn't really playing every day in the playoffs, but was always against lefties and then against some righties. And again, like when he did face lefties in 2024, he had a 968 OPS and a 166 WRC plus against left-handed pitching. So at the very least, he showed he could be a lefty crusher. And because of that, and again, the Guardians don't bring in a lot of offense every year. He made the team opening day roster for the first time in 2025 with Cleveland. And unfortunately, the struggles he saw in September and the postseason the previous year just kind of carried over into early in the 2025 season. He hit just 182 with little power in April, then hit just 105 with 1 home run in May, started June 1 for 10, and was optioned back to AAA in early June. He came back briefly to the big leagues for 3 games, started one of them in July before being sent back down, but did not fully return to the roster until they expanded on September 1st. Now, when he did go back down to AAA, he briefly started to hit again. He had about 250 plate appearances, 12 homers, 118 WRC plus, solid average. Strikeout rate wasn't too bad. And he still looked like he was a guy who could come back for a second chance at the big leagues and produce again. And he was somewhat of a playable platoon bat in the month of September for Cleveland. He got 42 plate appearances. They mostly started him against lefties. He did hit 4 homers and he maintained a 103 WRC plus. So all in all, he was like a league average hitter, but that league average hitter was headed up mostly by getting into his power because he also had 17 strikeouts versus just 1 walk in those 42 plate appearances. That's about a 40% strikeout rate. That is not where you want to be. He makes the playoff roster again, but Cleveland plays him in just 1 game, and he goes 0 for 3 with 3 punch-outs in that game. Now, he has a connection to Baltimore. Obviously, he knows new Orioles manager Craig Albernaz pretty well, as Albernaz was the bench coach in Cleveland for the past 2 years when Noel was on the big league team with the Guardians. But it was just since really July and August of 24, with the big playoff home run kind of nestled in there, it hasn't been a lot of great stuff from Noel at the big league level. And at that point, he became officially out of options because even though he's only 24 and generally guys don't run out of major league options till a lot later, he was a guy who had to be added to the 40-man roster pretty early, and the Guardians did that. He was put on the 40-man after the 2021 season when he was still in Double-A just to protect him from the Rule 5 draft. And so at that point, he ran out of his 3 minor league option years, and the Guardians, I guess, didn't think he could turn it around despite the fact that they don't have a lot of offense. So when they claimed left-handed reliever Justin Bruhill off of waivers on December 17th, they DFA'd Noel to make room on the 40-man roster. Now, it has been like 3 weeks since he's been DFA'd. Generally, it takes a lot shorter time for guys to get resolved when they're on waivers. But there is kind of an unspoken waiver freeze that happens around the holidays and the New Year's for about a week plus, where the waiver process just gets frozen. So that's why it took until January 5th for Noel to actually be claimed by a team. And that team was the Orioles. So what can he bring to the O's potentially? Like, could he find his way onto this roster in 2026? Are the flaws too much? Or can we see that kind of early first 2 months version of Noel we saw back in 2024? We'll try to break that down coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Fridays already feel different during basketball season, and FanDuel is making them even better. Every Friday night before the games tip off, FanDuel gives fans a new way to kick off the weekend with NBA Happy Hour. NBA Happy Hour is your official pregame, a limited time window where special offers drop right inside the FanDuel app before the action starts. And the time is perfect. It's right before the games and right before the weekend really kicks off. There's boosts, there's bonuses, and surprises. So before tip-off, check the FanDuel app and see what's dropping during NBA Happy Hour every Friday from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern. A little basketball, a little action, and a whole lot of Friday energy. That's NBA Happy Hour, only on FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. So we'll talk a little bit more about Jhonkensy Noel in just a moment. But first, I want to thank you for making Locked On Orioles your first listen of the day. And thanks for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. Now, you already live your team every day. Now it's time to take it up a level and go ad-free. Join the Everydayer Club today and get Locked On Orioles with no interruptions, members-only Discord access, and more, all for just $5 per month or $50 per year to save a little bit of money. Just go to lockedonorioles.supercast.com or check the link down here in the show notes to learn more about joining the Everydayer Club. So let's talk Jhonkensy Noel, claimed off waivers by the Orioles on Monday. How would he fit with the O's if he was really able to stick here? Now, with every waiver claim, especially with the Orioles roster getting better and better this offseason, there is a strong possibility that Noel is just DFA'd again soon by the Orioles and the O's try and sneak him through waivers. He's never cleared waivers before. So if a week from now, the Orioles designate Noel for assignment and he clears waivers, he would get to stay in the Orioles organization in AAA and not count against the 40-man roster. And frankly, that's what the Orioles are going to be hoping for here. I would find it very unlikely that Noel survives even for the next month and change into spring training, still being on the 40-man roster for the Orioles. And we'll talk about that in the final segment. The goal is you get him, you think, okay, we're around the middle of the waiver order. We got him. Maybe we can pass him through the rest of the waiver order and we can keep him in the organization. Now, there's still at least half the teams he'd have to go through when the Orioles DFA him. So there is a chance that Noel is just claimed by another team 2 weeks from now when the O's waive him and he never makes his way back to Baltimore. And kind of that's that. He's in the O's organization for a week. That's happened with plenty of players over the years, especially since Mike Elias has taken over. It's the risk you take. You're trying to pick up these guys and get some interesting, intriguing talent into your organization. But this is a guy who kind of does, I do hope he sticks around because I think there is still something in that bat because he's been very, very good in AAA the past 2 years. And it's not just the statistics I talked about, like he was really productive in AAA 2024 and 2025, but it's also the batted ball data is just absurd. He hit a ball in 2024 118.4 miles per hour off the bat in AAA. That was one of the 5 hardest hit balls by any AAA hitter that season. He ran a 12% barrel rate, which is really, really good in AAA, mashed when he made contact. And his kind of overall batted ball data was a little more consistent across the board in 2025 in AAA. He jumped his hard hit rate from 38% to 46%, which is a much, much better number. Started pulling the ball in the air even more. Again, pulling the ball in the air leads to more extra base hits and home runs. And I mean, like, even in Major League Baseball, it was a 14.5% barrel rate for Noel in those 2 months and change in 2024. And the bat speed is just absurd. That's why teams are going to be on him. It's a 78 mile per hour average bat speed. A lot of guys can't even get close to that on their hardest swing. That was 6th among all major league hitters this season in terms of best bat speed on average. The 5 above him, Giancarlo Stanton, O'Neal Cruz, Junior Caminero, Riley Adams, and Jordan Walker. And if you look through the final of the kind of top 10, top 15 of that list, you'll get the Aaron Judges and the Kyle Schwarbers of the world, but you'll also get the Jordan Walkers of the world where it's like he has all this talent and he's never been able to put it together. Noel is kind of a Jordan Walker type player where you see all the underlying skills, but there's not really a defensive position for him and there's way too much swing and miss. But everybody keeps trying on him because you just salivate looking at the data and looking at what he could be. Basically for Noel, if he can make a little more contact, if he can cut his chase rate a little bit, if he can make specifically more contact on pitches inside the strike zone, You have a guy who at the very least can come off your bench, start against lefties, be a menacing pinch hitter, always be a power threat to leave the ballpark, and still has room to improve because he's only 24 years old. But again, there are big downfalls, which is why he was a guy at 24 who was on waivers from a team that generally needs power like the Cleveland Guardians. The plate approach is just awful. It's a 49% chase rate. It's a 35% swing and miss rate. It's a 34% strikeout rate. Those are some of the worst numbers by hitters in Major League Baseball this season. Specifically, he was pretty solid against fastballs, but he whiffed 43% of the time against breaking balls and 48% of the time against off-speed pitches this year in the big leagues. That's essentially unplayable, which is why he had a batting average in the 160s and was really, really bad in those 2 months before the Guardians finally sent him back down to AAA in June. He also never really walked a lot when he was in the minor leagues. He certainly hasn't done it in the majors. He's just truly been a boom or bust hitter. You talk about guys, kind of those classic 3 true outcomes hitters. Orioles Chris Davis was one of those where it was like you could almost count on it either being a walk, a strikeout, or a home run when he came to the plate. Prodigious home run power, good batter's eye, but swung and missed a ton to strike out. Noel is not that because he doesn't have the batter's eye that some of those guys have. And a lot of those guys could be good players because even though they swung and missed a lot inside the zone, they took most of the pitches outside the zone. It allowed them to still run a high on base percentage, still mash fastballs out of the ballpark, and be a productive hitter. Noel does 2 of the things. He's got the big power. He can mash the ball. He's got the swing and miss in the zone, but he also chases way too much out of the zone. He doesn't have that batter's eye that would basically allow him to be a major league regular. That's what you would have to figure out. If he's still going to chase, I mean, it's up towards 50%. Even if it's around 40% of the time he's chasing, he would have to be better on pitches inside the strike zone, and he's just not that right now. The other issue is the defense, not very good. He was signed as a third baseman as a teenager. Also, he kind of split his time between first base and third base in his first few years in the minors. Officially gave up third base in the minors in 2024, but in 2022, he also started playing a little bit out of outfield to make him more versatile. And outfield's where he's mostly been in MLB. Right field has been his position for the Guardians. About 700 innings in right field to go with about 89 innings at first base for Cleveland. Also did play 1 game in left field. Now, he has not been a good defensive outfielder, a -5 outs above average over the past 2 seasons in the big leagues, but he has a cannon throwing arm. He can run faster than you think when you look at his body. He's definitely more athletic than you would think. And he has been, again, it's been 89 innings, but metrically, he's been solid defensively at first base. He looks a lot more comfortable there than he does in the outfield. And that's what you generally say about players like this. I would compare him kind of to Ryan O'Hearn defensively, where it's like, yeah, you can put him in right field if you absolutely need to, and he can start a game out there for you, and he's not going to decimate your team. But you feel much more comfortable defensively when he's at first base, and he looks a lot more comfortable in handling that position when he's out there. Noel is kind of the same type of thing defensively. So I see all that, and I see, well, Connor, the Orioles already have too many of those guys. They signed Pete Alonso to a 5-year deal, and they still have Ryan Mountcastle and Kobe Mayo on this 40-man roster trying to decide what in the world they're going to do with those guys between now and opening day. And now you add another guy into that exact equation in Jhonkensy Noel. He brings a little more versatility because he can play the outfield, and those other 3 guys can't. But he also is a worse hitter than any of those 3. So he's really just joining an already crowded conversation. That is certainly true. But here's what Noel could do for you, right? Again, the Orioles are going to DFA him at some point this offseason. If he does clear waivers and stick with the O's in the organization, he's going to come to big league spring training as a non-roster invite. If they find a way to move both Mayo and Mountcastle, like maybe Kobe Mayo is moved in a trade for pitching later this offseason, and maybe they find a taker for Ryan Mountcastle. They get a nice, interesting up-down relief arm for Mountcastle and some cash, or Mountcastle and a low-level prospect or something. Noel could be the guy who's then all of a sudden fighting for a bench spot. Because if you don't have Mayo and Mountcastle, you just have Alonso, you have room for a lefty masher on your bench who maybe can platoon with Basayo a little bit, can pinch hit for you late in games, can start every once in a while against a lefty. And at 24, there is room for growth for a guy like this. And again, I'm not putting a lot of trust in him. This could be 2 segments of an episode for a guy who's gone in a week and is never back in Baltimore. It is certainly a possibility, but he's an exciting player who's had some really cool moments, has crazy power, and is still only 24 years old. He is still a guy you can dream on, and that's obviously why the Orioles taking a chance on him here with this waiver claim. So Jhonkensy Noel is in. The 40-man roster is once again full. Here as I sit here on January 6th. What does that mean for the 40-man for the rest of the offseason? The O's are going to make some more moves. Who is on the roster bubble? We'll talk about that to finish off the show coming up next. So for the Orioles, they have a full 40-man roster. To get Jhonkensy Noel on the roster via the waiver claim, right-handed pitcher George Soriano was DFA'd because the roster was full. Soriano, a right-handed reliever who the Orioles claimed off waivers from the Marlins all the way back on November 5th, so earlier this offseason, survived 2 months on the 40-man and then was DFA'd. He's a 26-year-old righty, was kind of an up-down reliever with the Marlins for the past 3 seasons. Overall, in that stretch, 118 big league innings, a 5.95 ERA with a 22% strikeout rate and a 10% walk rate. He had a pretty bad year this year when the Marlins finally DFA'd him at 8.35 ERA in 37 innings in the big leagues, and also ran out of minor league options after this season. But he has been really great in his time in AAA the past couple of years. His fastball ticked up from 94 to 96 this season, still has a good slider, but he's out of options. And again, the Orioles are going to hope that Soriano clears waivers and they can keep him in AAA as relief depth. But for the Orioles, I really do think they're going to make at least 3 more MLB moves this offseason. I think they're going to look for maybe a utility man to upgrade from Jeremiah Jackson. I think they're going to look to add 1 more big league reliever. And I still do think, even after the Shane Baz and the Zach Eflin acquisitions, that the Orioles are going to add another starting pitcher. And we got, further reporting from Will Salmon and Ken Rosenthal on The Athletic on Monday. It was kind of followed up and confirmed by Andy Kuska at the Baltimore Banner here on Tuesday that the Orioles are still in on conversations and interested in signing either Ranger Suarez or Framber Valdez, the top 2 free agent starting pitchers remaining on the market. So to me, that's 3 more MLB moves. And when you have a full 40-man roster, that's at least 3 guys who are going to have to go. And that's not even factoring in the Orioles probably making a couple more moves like this Noel waiver claim, whereas they see an interesting player come across the waiver wire and they want to claim them, trying to get them in the organization and keep them in the organization by passing them through waivers a little bit later. They've tried it with some guys this offseason. Josh Walker's been through it. Drew Romo has been through it, and other guys will be through it as well during the offseason. So if you look at the 40-man roster, I kind of compiled a top 5, right? So let's say there are 3 more major league signings and 2 more waiver claims that happen, right? That could be 5 more players on the 40-man roster who could lose their spots. So top 3, I would think, is the most important because I do think there's going to be 3 more guys who lose it. So here is my ranking of most likely to be DFA'd next off the 40-man roster. Number 1 is, of course, Jhonkensy Noel himself. As I mentioned, he's going to be DFA'd by the Orioles again later in the offseason. They're going to try to pass him through waivers and keep him in the organization. He's going to be the first one to go. It's kind of that, last one in, first one out kind of thing with the 40-man. He's the obvious number 1 on this list. The funny thing is, once you get past Noel, and for me, before the Noel moved, Soriano, who was DFA'd, he was also in that same category of claimed earlier this offseason, is going to be the next to go. Once you get past Jhonkensy Noel, it's a little intriguing, actually, because you can make an argument that these would be kind of hard decisions to make after Noel. Number 2 on my list would be right-handed reliever Jose Espada. Orioles signed him to a minor league deal last offseason. They promoted him onto the 40-man roster when he had an opt-out in his deal. He came to the big leagues and made only 1 MLB appearance, but it was awesome. He pitched 3 scoreless innings and looked absolutely filthy, and the O's have kept him on the 40-man all offseason. However, in the grand scheme of things, it's 1 big league appearance. He could be on that roster chopping block, but he looks really, really good. Number 3 on my list would be a guy that I like a lot and a lot of people like a lot, and that would be right-handed reliever Colin Selby. I mean, he has shown some enticing stuff. Orioles brought him in on waivers back in the 2024 season. He kind of bounced around with a couple of different teams in AAA and the majors. It's 2 fastballs with good velocity, 96, 97. The breaking balls, though, are just what makes it for Colin Selby. He's got a slider and a curveball that are both just kind of ridiculous. But at the end of the day, he's only pitched a total of 14 games and 18 innings out of the Orioles bullpen the past 2 years because it hasn't been a lot of arm stuff specifically, but it's been multiple different injuries that have kept him out. Now, when he's been on the field, it's been a 2.50 ERA with 19 strikeouts to 4 walks in those 18 innings. He's looked good. The stuff has looked really good, but he had a chance. This is the issue with Selby. He had a chance to get a lot of relief outings in 2025, especially when the Orioles traded away all those relievers at the deadline. And he got hurt. And it was like a lower body injury, so it wasn't an arm thing, but he got hurt at basically the worst time. He's already 28. He's now officially out of minor league options, which makes it even harder for the Orioles to keep him around. I know they want to because they like the stuff, but I just think he's one of the next guys to go, just a victim of circumstance is Colin Selby. Number 4 on my list would be righty reliever Yarmil Geraldo. Orioles also brought him in on a minor league deal last season, got himself to the big leagues last year, and I thought really showed some interesting stuff. Did Geraldo. Now he is 30 years old at this point. He does have minor league options remaining, which is why he's below Selby on this list. He gave the O's a 4.58 ERA in 19 2/3 innings out of the bullpen in his big league debut last season. He hadn't been in affiliated ball for 4 years before the Orioles kind of found him and signed him. I mean, showed off this really, really good kind of split changeup that he would throw. The slider had really interesting stuff. I think they like him, but again, it's kind of a numbers game. And then number 5 on my list might just be Leody Taveras. I mean, it's weird because the Orioles signed him to a 1-year, $2 million major league contract very early in the offseason to kind of be the 5th outfielder, kind of center fielder, defensive replacement on this team. But he would be a guy that comes up on this list at number 5, that if the Orioles maybe upgrade in center field, they get another like other option besides Colton Cowser, who has a higher upside than Taveras, who really had a tough offensive year with the Rangers and the Mariners in 2025. Maybe he's a guy who, for just a $2 million contract, you just kind of cut him loose and move on to the next guy. It's something that the Orioles, I think, could do in this circumstance. Then I came up with a list of like 6 more guys that maybe could be in trouble in the right situation. Grant Wolfram, you're kind of an up-down reliever. I love his stuff. Orioles love his stuff, but it's possible. Keegan Aiken is in his last year before free agency. He was not very good in 2025. The Orioles really like what Aiken's given them, but maybe they upgrade with another lefty reliever and Aiken goes. Chase McDermott would be a weird one to DFA just because of all the injuries. He's gotten so little time to try and prove himself in the big leagues. They just finally officially converted him to a reliever in the second half of last year. So you want to give him more time to do that, but time could be running out on these 40-man roster spots if he's injured again. Rico Garcia was very good, but he's older. He's been a lot of different places to try and prove himself. You never know if he's going to make this roster. He's also out of options. Reed Trimble was a kind of surprising add to the 40-man roster to protect him from the Rule 5 draft this offseason. The outfielder who's had so many injury issues, then finally kind of was healthy and broke out in AAA in the second half of last season. Yeah, it'd be weird to add a guy to the 40-man and then immediately DFA him 2 months later, but you never know if the O's really don't see him in the 2026 plans. And then the last guy on the list, I would say, is Ryan Mountcastle. It's still not out of the question that the Orioles would DFA Ryan Mountcastle later in the offseason if they can't find a trade partner and he really just doesn't fit on the roster. He's out of minor league options. He's a free agent after 2026 anyway. It is still certainly a possibility. So those are the names I would look at as the Orioles try and continue to add some guys to this organization. That'll do it for today's episode. Remember, though, as a thank you to you all for getting me over 10,000 subscribers here on the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel by the new year, we are doing a giveaway. We got multiple things on the bookshelf behind me being given away. One of them is the Jim Palmer replica statue from the Legends Park out there. One of them is the Cal Ripken Jr. replica Hall of Fame plaque. We got a couple more bobbleheads and things that are going to be given away. There's going to be multiple winners of the giveaway. To enter, you got to do 2 things. Number 1, subscribe to the Locked On Orioles podcast here on YouTube. Number 2, put a comment in the comment section on today's video, on yesterday's video, or any video for the rest of this week. Just basically giving me your honest feedback on the show. I want to know your thoughts on the content, the timing, the posting schedule, the audio, video stuff about it, what I talk about, things you'd like to see, things you have liked in the past, whatever it may be. We're Orioles are moving into a new era. We're moving into a new calendar year. I want to know if I need to change some things, move into a new era on this podcast as well to keep it the best I can for you all, the listeners, and for the viewers. So subscribe to the show, leave a comment about your honest feedback, and you'll be entered to win one of the cool pieces of Orioles merch and memorabilia that is behind me. I will be back tomorrow. We're breaking down the little bit we got to see of Tyler Wells' season when he came back from elbow surgery, and then the continued conversation of, is Wells a starter or a reliever for the Orioles in 2026? That's on tomorrow's episode. Until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.